I want to welcome folks back to our 37th episode of Zoom conversations, Zoom interviews. And we're actually doing it on what is marking the 1-year anniversary of our last field trip here, school field trip to the library. So about the 1-year anniversary of the pandemic really starting to hit. And we have a school teacher with us today, Tyler Duran from Lawrence High School in Fairfield. And many of our early conversations were with teachers and students to find out how people were dealing with the pandemic. So Tyler, why don't you tell us what the past year has been like from the standpoint of a teacher?
Well, much like my students, it's been a learning experience for me as well. New technologies, new ways of adapting your lessons. Our school has done a hybrid model, which I believe is probably the most popular method that school districts, at least in Maine, have implemented, where half our kids show up one day, the other half show up the other day. And we do have a handful of kids who are fully remote and a handful of kids who actually come every single day. Many of them vocational students because they need to be at the Voc Center every day to get that hands-on learning.
Mm-hmm.
So navigating teaching to students and teaching to a computer has kind of been the most challenging. It feels, it feels like you're doing two things at once, but you're trying to make it synchronous.
Yeah.
But I think the kids in general, their attitudes
Mm-hmm.
have been good as I think, teenagers can be. There have been moments for each one of them where they've become incredibly frustrated and upset, but they have adapted to what we need to do to continue the education, I think, very well.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been pleasantly surprised with their perseverance, I would say, through this past year.
That's encouraging to hear. I had my first chance to teach to high school students. I've done some of this online teaching with college students, and it was very disconcerting in that some of the kids were in the class and some of the kids are online, and it's just hard. It's hard to feel the connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what I've noticed too, David, is for me personally, the kids get most engaged when they're home, when you have a conversation with them. Yeah. And I try to call at them, hey, so-and-so, what do you think of this? Or, all right, I'm going to pick on this person for a while and I want your opinion on this. But when you have a group of people in front of you, sometimes you forget that camera is recording and it's on, and you forget to reach out, particularly if I'm doing a lecture where I have my PowerPoint slides sharing on the screen and I don't get to see the kids there. So every once in a while, I'll just say, man, it's been a half an hour since I've talked to somebody at home. I need to remind myself to do that.
My other experience is doing book discussions where everyone is remote, and that in a way is easier to track because you just see everyone on a screen.
Yeah, I imagine.
All right, so you've persevered. That's the key word. And do you feel like it's a diminished quality of learning for the past year?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say it's kind of a loaded question in the sense that myself and the students are trying our hardest to provide a quality education. I think I would be remiss to say that they're getting the same education that they would have if they were all in person and we were all synchronously learning together. What I found is by modifying and accommodating a lot of my instruction for students because of this hybrid model, I have had to cut out or modify a lot of the activities that I find to be most meaningful. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I do in AP government, I did it last year and probably is the best memory of the students in that class, was we went to the federal courthouse and visited with Judge Lance Walker up in Bangor.
And what federal courthouse is that?
I believe it's the second federal courthouse.
No.
The Margaret Chase Smith building.
Margaret Chase Smith Federal Courthouse.
So we went up there and it was great. And the kids participated in a activity called civil discourse, where they argued cases, and it was all about having completely opposite and polar opinions about something. In this case, First Amendment, but being able to civilly argue and not view disagreements as attacks, which I thought was really relevant. And the kids got the experience of going there. And, we would always come to the MCS library and visit you folks in the spring.
Mhm.
And those activities, even though they can be modified, I don't think they have the same effect. And in class, the same way, we do debates. And I've had to, as a teacher, make a decision between depth and breadth, I would say,
Mhm.
is if I'm going to spend this time on a debate and do it where they get out what I want them to get out of it, I'm going to have to spend 2 to 3 times more time on it, because I need to simulate that with this group of kids and with that group of kids.
Mhm.
And as a result, I have to say, okay, well, what am I going to cut out of my curriculum, or what am I only going to briefly cover? So it's hard for me to say they're getting the same quality of education that they did pre-pandemic.
Have you been given any guidance on the future? I assume you'll continue the rest of the school year with a hybrid model, but has there been any discussion of what to expect in the fall?
Not at our district yet. My wife works at a different district, and they're still in the planning stages, but they have insinuated that the possibility of students still going remote for at least the beginning of next year is there, whether or not the board decides on it or not. I think at the local level, a lot of schools are looking at the vaccine rollout and how that's going to go, and kind of waiting to make any major decisions until this summer.
Mhm. I bring it up because the chancellor of the University of Maine system just in the past couple of days has laid down the expectation that by September that the university system will be open in person.
Oh, good. I didn't see that.
Yeah. I don't know. He at least was internally announced. I don't know. I think I saw it on the news that they
Yeah.
that's the hope. I mean, again, we'll have to see how things proceed during the summer, but that is the goal.
Yep. Yeah. And I think a lot of school districts, they want to be cohesive. So we're waiting on direction from the DOE and from the state, and everything is, kind of determined by what the federal government does. So, at the local level, we're kind of tier 3, and we're waiting to see what the other 2 tiers decide.
Well, and there's a lot younger people that are being involved in school districts as opposed to the university system.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so let's move on to how we came to know you, and it's by virtue of you bringing students here
Yep.
to the library for field trips. And you mentioned that you teach AP Government.
Yep.
What else are you teaching this year, school year?
So this year I've taught AP Government, which was a first semester course. So the students are done with that. I'll review with them probably mid-April, right around April break, shortly before or after for the exam. But their direct instruction with me ended in January. I'm teaching AP US History, which is a year-long course. So I still have those same students. I meet with them every day for a whole year. And then I've taught 3 sections of US History 1, which covers from the 7 Years' War through the Progressive Era.
Very good. So for people who don't know, AP stands for Advanced Placement. And it's it's at a higher level from the standpoint, it's a national curriculum. So every AP throughout the United States would be essentially doing the same curriculum.
Yep.
And there is an exam that's involved. And back when I was in school, it was a way that oftentimes students could get exempted from having to take the class in college, although AP seems to have changed quite a bit. It's actually much more prevalent today in a way. And I don't know that students necessarily use it as a way of exempting themselves from college courses. It's more as a way of getting into college to show college is the level to which students have attained.
Yeah, the numbers, and that's encouraging. The numbers have gone up for sure. My first year teaching it, I think this is my 10th year. I took it over my 3rd year teaching, and this is my 12th year teaching. And my first year, I had 7 students in the class.
Mm-hmm.
And this year, I have 24 students in the class. And I'll regularly have in the 20s, and every once in a while I'll be in the mid to upper 30s, which we usually will split into two sections at that point. But I was on the precipice this year. I had 28 and I decided to keep them in one group. And because of COVID, we had a couple kids switch into regular US history. But with more kids taking it, I agree. I do think it's more a way to get into some of those elite schools or to maybe earn scholarships as opposed to actually getting the college credit, which they still get, but that's a school by school basis. So whether a school accepts a 3, which is a minimum passing score, or they require a 4 or 5, which is a more advanced passing score, that's done by the institution themselves.
Well, I want to do a share screen here to show you here with some of your students.
Okay.
This is, there you are.
Oh, geez. Yeah, look at that. That's awesome.
2015, so about coming up on 6 years ago.
Yeah.
So you would, one of the reasons that many schools like to bring their AP US history students to the library is that one of the components of the exam is called the document-based question, where students have to work with primary documents to answer an essay question. So some schools that bring the AP students, it's to give them some idea of what we mean by primary documents, of which the Margaret Chase Smith Library has many. In my recollection, another model for AP classes is that the exam comes usually like towards the beginning of May.
Yep.
So then that leaves like 4 to 6 weeks at the end of the semester where they've already taken their exam, but they still need to go to class. I think for some years when you brought your students, they were working on research projects.
Yeah, that's what we do. That's what we do traditionally at the end of the year. So this year it's going to be a little different. We'll have to see how it plays out. The College Board this year actually they're giving the kids 3 options of when they want to take the exam. So they can take them in person or online, and they can do that the traditional time, which is the beginning of May. They can also take it at the end of May and beginning of June. But in a non-COVID year, once they take the exam, we do a month-long research project at the end where they write a research paper, formulate their own thesis, conduct their research, and then work with me for the last month, editing that paper, submitting rough drafts, and then a final product at the end. And that's always extremely fun to read. I tell the kids, I forced you to learn this stuff all year, and now you get to choose what you want to learn for the last month of school. And they really, really enjoy it, I think, for the most part, and they dive right into it. And I've seen some great research papers and projects come out of it. And that was kind of my connection, David, to National History Day. That's how we got started.
Great segue. You're a natural at this.
So yeah, we that was kind of one of the ways that we looked at it one year, and I said, hey, there's this competition. If you guys do the research ahead of time, we can work on editing it and working on it at the very end. You won't have to write a paper. So when kids heard 500-word exhibit, no 10-page paper, they kind of jumped on it. But to be honest with you, I think they put in more time and effort building the exhibits for National History Day than they would have written the paper. But they enjoyed it. And that's really what you want to do with this kind of exploratory learning, is get them into a subject matter that they are interested in, and it doesn't feel like work anymore.
So that was a great lead in for another topic I wanted to discuss. History Day is something very near and dear to the Margaret Chase Smith Library, in that our museum assistant, John Taylor, is the state coordinator for National History Day in Maine. And it's a program for 6th through 12th graders who are divided up into junior and senior divisions. And I believe there's 5 different categories they can compete in as either individuals or groups. So your students have obviously been in the senior division.
Yep.
And I believe you've had some successful projects along the way, in which we have regional competition. In a normal year, we'd have a regional competition, state competition, and then the top 2 entries at the state competition get to go on to National History Day, which is always held at the University of Maryland in June, in a normal year, not in pandemic years. So can you tell us about I believe you had the opportunity to go down to the University of Maryland for National History Day, is that correct?
I did, yeah. So we had several students. I believe the last one I counted, I think it's 15 students that have been able to participate in nationals in the 6 years that I've done it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've traveled down with those students 5 times to the University of Maryland and then in DC itself. And what a great opportunity it is for those kids. And it's always a joy to see what they're interested in, what they want to do, how much they want to sometimes edit or redo their projects, their faces when they get to go to certain museums. I remember the first group I took down, this was right when John had taken over. So he was still figuring out what to do at nationals. And I had called one of my friends I went to high school with was working in Senator Collins's office. So I contacted him and said, hey, could you get us, a sit down meeting with Senator Collins where we can get a picture taken and we can get a tour of the Capitol and tickets to the Holocaust Museum and to the Kennedy Center. And he said, sure. And he set it all up for me. Now John does that with everyone. He sets up times with the 2 state senators. But we had gone there and I remember telling the kids, I go, listen, Senator Collins is, she's a nice woman, but she's an important person. So don't be too intimidated by her. She's going to ask you a series of questions. What was your project on? What are you doing? And like most 17-year-olds, they were acting cool, like, oh, Mr. Duran, it's no big deal. And they met Senator Collins, and I remember her shaking their hands, and she said, so what are your plans next year? And one of the boys looked at her and just said, college. He goes, oh, what college? University of Maine. What are you majoring in? Nursing. What kind of nursing? Nursing. And it was so good. And she left and they were like, wow, I did not think I'd be that intimidated.
Wow,
said,
interesting.
It's going to happen, but they were good. So I've kind of told that story to the new kids and they kind of laugh and they experience that same emotion. It's different when you're actually in that Capitol building with
in the moment.
Yeah. But she was wonderful. And Senator King, when I've interacted with him, has been just as wonderful with the kids. But taking them down there, a lot of them, it's the first time they've really traveled that far. And it's the first time they've experienced a lot of other cultures. I've had 2 students that it was the first time they've left the state of Maine. First time they've been on an airplane. So all that experience, couple obviously with National History Day, the research, the projects presenting and the arguments, but the life experience they get, it's irreplaceable. It really is.
Well, it reminds me of Margaret back here behind me. She had the opportunity to take a field trip to Washington, D.C. when she was a senior in high school, and how much of an impression it made on her life. I'm sure it, planted that idea. This is someplace I might to be someday, and sure enough, it came true. So yeah, who knows what seeds you plant in the minds of young people. Yeah, very good. So what is your status this year? Did you try to take on History Day this year?
So this year, a couple things happened. With the pandemic, it was a little difficult just to organize meetings. We did attempt a couple Google Meets virtually, but our county went yellow sometime in October, which prohibited us from doing any after-school meetings, which really made it difficult to coordinate certain things with kids and kind of go over and show them examples of what good research looked like. And so what I told the students was, we'll probably go green at some point, and we did in November, December. And I told them, so we're going to hold off. We'll meet again in the winter, and then we'll start our research. And unfortunately, I had a medical emergency where I was out of school for 10 weeks. So when I got back, I had emailed the kids before I got back, and I basically said, if you want to do a project on your own, you have my full support, and I'll be here as a resource for you. But I won't be able to conduct meetings and put in the effort that I had in past years, which I felt bad for the seniors for. But fortunately, most of the kids that were in History Club last year participate as juniors. So if they come back as seniors, they've already done it. And they were very good and they were understanding. And I pushed them into the direction of the Margaret Chase Smith essay contest for them to do some work and research. So what I did was I contacted John, and I'm going to be a judge this year. So I still wanted to be involved in a capacity I could. So I figured, what better time to see what the other side looks like than when I don't have anyone competing. So there's not going to be that bias or any of the other factors you would concern yourself with. So he emailed me my judge packet and tutorials today, and I'll be looking over them in the next couple of nights, and I'm ready to start judging in 2 weeks.
Excellent. Well, that's another component, is these students in 6th through 12th grade do their projects, and then they're judged by adults. And partly it's to select who gets to move on, but another piece of it is to try to be educational, to try to give them guidance on how they can improve their projects, which is important at the regional level, because many of them are going to have the chance to go on to states. And even at the states, it's important for those who get to go on to nationals that they get some guidance on how they can improve their projects as they advance along. So we'll welcome you aboard as a judge for this year.
Looking forward to it.
Very good. Have there been some memorable History Day projects by your students? I'm thinking I remember one, just because it's someone that I've had some interest in terms of my research. I think you had a student who did a project on Louis Sockalexis.
Yep.
Who was one of the first Native American baseball players. And the lore is that the Cleveland Indians, who are soon no longer to be the Cleveland Indians, were named in honor of Louis Sockalexis from Maine.
Yeah, I believe they were the Cleveland Spiders when he played for them. And he was such an amazing baseball player and had such an impact in a short amount of time that in honor of him, that's what the rumor is. Who knows if that's true. It was also popular at that time to name professional teams after Native American groups or just Native Americans in general. But that was a really cool project. He was, a kid that was very scholarly, but also very interested in sports. He was a huge Red Sox fan, and he wanted to do a Maine-based project. So I kind of showed him an article from, I think, the Bangor Daily News, and he dove right into it and became very interested in that project.
Well, he's been in the news a lot, even though he died decades and decades ago, because of this whole issue of the naming of the Cleveland Indians. And I think there's a movement to try to build a statue of him in the Bangor area.
Oh, very good. Yeah, I one of the stories I heard about him, I don't know if it was true, was that on Indian Island, he would throw baseballs from the other side of the Penobscot into the island, which is like hundreds and hundreds of feet, a feat that most people couldn't accomplish, and someone would catch it on the island, and that's how he would practice.
Well, I know him through Poland Spring. Poland Spring had a baseball team, and they had him on their baseball team. And so there was all this lore of the feats that he was able to do at Poland Spring, which one was that he was able to throw the baseball over the tower of the Poland Spring house, which was like 500 or 600 feet.
Yeah.
high. Yeah.
Oh, no kidding. So that was a memorable project, David. Another one that was really memorable for me was I had a group of students that did a project on Matthew Shepard, who was part of the Laramie, Wyoming tragedy. And our theater company at our school had done a play. I can't remember the name of it, but it's a play based on his life. And they did it for their one-act competition. They came in first place, and this group of students really, really liked that play, and it sparked their interest. And they ended up doing a project on him and really explicating how he was a turning point in history for the LGBT community, where it raised awareness at a national level, kind of similar to what Harvey Milk does, I think, when he runs for government. And what was so impressive about that project for me, and I think John would probably tell you the same thing, because I know he uses their picture in his presentations when he does training, is they completely made a brand new project when they went to nationals. And I was so impressed and so amazed by them. They had a trifold display that they had come in first place in the state with, and it had a collage of pictures, and it had, the fence post where he tragically died, a replica of it, small replica on it. And then they created a 3D version of that. They had, electric visual lights on it. They had features that popped out from it. There was a big LGBT flag on the top of it. I mean, it was night and day what that looked like. And I think that's probably the best that my kids have ever represented themselves at nationals was the edits that they had made. But if you looked at those two projects, you wouldn't even know that it was the same group of students competing. They really amped up their level of competition for nationals, which I think as an advisor, and hopefully that's the goal of judging, is to get the students to improve their research and to put out a better quality product.
And you mentioned Turning Point. Every year there's a theme. So that year it was Turning Points in History. This year the theme is communication. So that's a way to help to try to focus the students' research. But on the other hand, they tend to be fairly broad topics. So John, I think, started to tell me what some of the topics were for communication in history. Again, that can be fairly broad in terms of the directions you can take a topic like that.
Absolutely.
All right. So,
I always told John, because every year there's a bunch of MCS projects, and I said, no matter what the topic is, Margaret can fit into one of them: communication, declaration of conscience. Right?
Exactly. We already know there's some students out there doing projects on Margaret, and yes, they're going to choose the Declaration of Conscience. Turning Point in History. You can work the Declaration. You can always count every year, usually on Margaret Chase Smith and Jackie Robinson.
Yep, 100%.
Very good. So something else I remember that I learned as you started to get involved in the History program is I think you already referenced it, that you have a history club that you run.
Yep.
Tell us about your history club.
So the history club was it was something that I came up with, and I wanted to start it for two reasons. Number one, to give students who have an interest in history a chance to continue exploring that in an extracurricular way. So, anyone who's gone to high school in the last 50 years knows that there's, sports for the kids who are into athletics, and then there's extracurriculars. But when it comes to your academic extracurriculars, it seems for some reason that our subject matter always got overlooked. There was always a math team, right? There was usually a library club, which tied into literature and English very well. There's always a French club. The Latin kids have the Junior Classical League and the competitions that they go to, but there was never anything for history, unfortunately. And so I had one year, and I'll give the students all the credit. I had 3 girls one year that came up to me, and they were really interested in taking some historical field trips. They really wanted to go to Boston to do the Freedom Trail. And they came to me. I was maybe 24, 25. I'm a young teacher who's gung-ho about every new idea. And they said, hey, we want to do like a history club so that we can go on historical field trips. And I said, yeah, sure, absolutely. Let's do it. That's how it started. And we got some kids into it. We went down to Boston that year. I took my AP class, which was only 7 kids. It was me, one other teacher, 13 students, pretty manageable. And each year, David, we've just added kind of more and more to what the history club does. And when I got introduced to NHD, after I had come and done a tour with you, you had sent me an email and said, hey, there's this thing called National History Day. You should sign up for it. Your kids should look into it. This is back when I think it was still on the state website was where you went to get the information. There was no affiliation with Maine yet. And I said, sure, that looks good. And I chose 3 students specifically and said, we're going to do, a little test run with you 3. I have no idea what this is. So I'm going to work with you 3. And they ended up coming in 2nd place that year in the group exhibit. They ended up going to nationals. I had some money saved up in my budget. And after that, NHD became the primary focus of the history club. We also show historical movies, or we try to show historical movies once a quarter. That's an extra credit assignment in my history classes. And then we still organize a couple field trips. There's nothing regularly that we do. Sometimes we do the Freedom Trail in Boston. Other times we'll do the Margaret Chase Smith Library. That comes out of the history club budget to do that. The civil discourse, the Margaret Chase Smith Bangor Courthouse came out of the history club as well. So it just gives kids an opportunity to participate in an extracurricular activity that is focused on a subject matter that they like, You
mentioned something else I remember you talking about, probably in context of the history club, is history and movies.
Mhm.
Is that something you've been able to do this year?
This year, I haven't done any showings, but I will tell you that in terms of getting students to view historically based movies, in the past couple of years, it's been a lot easier with the advent of streaming services.
Okay.
So I used to, I still do have a collection of historical movies that I've purchased and I keep at the school, and I let kids rent out to watch them. And when we viewed them at school, it was Mr. Duran's copy of Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Or Mr. Duran's copy of Last of the Mohicans. Those were some films that we watched. Even a couple of them are still on VHS. But now I realize when I tell the kids about these movies, like half of them are on Netflix or Hulu. So the kids have actually been engaging a little more. And with some of the miniseries, I required them to watch the first 2 episodes. And some kids will come back and go, "Yeah, I watched all of John Adams. It was great." So the engagement has been great, but unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we haven't been able to find a way to organize them after school in a socially distant way that's okay.
Mhm. Why did you decide to become a social studies teacher?
There's a couple reasons. I always had a love for history,
Mhm.
and I really liked doing historical research. And my original plan, when I was in high school, I kind of had 2 career paths that I was choosing. One of them was going to go into library science. I really wanted to be a librarian. And I knew I had to go to graduate school for that. So one interest that I always had was becoming a school librarian. And I was also really interested in history. So when I realized that I needed to get an undergraduate degree and then get my master's in library science, I said, well, why don't I get one in social studies education? That would put me in a good position to be a high school librarian, and it would also put me in a good position to do research at a museum or to get into, maybe working in state archives or something to that nature. So that was kind of the general plan, was kind of get your degree and then go to graduate school. And then I student taught, and I just fell in love with it. And I have not yet gone to graduate school because I just really enjoy my job and want to continue doing it. And I'll blame the kids for that, but in a good way. So I really enjoyed working with the kids. I really enjoyed trying to make a subject that had traditionally, and I still don't understand it, and I'm sure you don't, but traditionally it had been a boring subject for a lot of people. Oh, that's just dates and place names and people, and you got to memorize the order of the presidents. And I wanted to make it more engaging and exploratory. And the more I got kids interested in the subject matter, the more I enjoyed teaching. It's not without its frustrations, but so I would say it was purposeful, but also accidental, what kind of drew me into the teacher world.
Well, you said that you've always been interested in history, and I'm interested in that statement because the programs I did for the high school yesterday, they wanted me to talk about history as a career. And so I was talking about how I got interested in history. How did you get interested in history?
I think it was a natural curiosity that a lot of historians have. And I'm not calling myself a historian.
Of course you are a historian.
An amateur historian, we'll say
No,
that.
you're not. You get paid.
I remember as a kid, I would just like look around and I would say, why is Middle Street named Middle Street? Okay. Like, why is it called High Street? Like, what is it high from? What's lower than High Street? And I was always so fascinated when I heard stories of why things were the way they were. So to me, hearing that the Green Bay Packer football team is named that because of the huge meatpacking industry in the Midwest, that is something that is incredibly cool. And the Pittsburgh Steelers is where Carnegie built his steel mill. These things, I just was so fascinated with them, and it started to explain a lot of the world around me. And I started to dive more and more into history. But I also will give a big, shout out to my teachers that I had in school. And I said this in a college class once when we were talking about why we decided to go into social studies as opposed to some other disciplines. And I said, my favorite classes were always social studies. My favorite teachers were always social studies teachers. To this day, I don't know if those teachers made me fall in love with the subject, or if that subject made me fall in love with the teachers.
Yeah.
But the most impactful and influential people I ever had were from that subject matter, and it just created this desire to try to discover more about the world around me. Probably similar to how a lot of scientists get into science, right? They want to find answers, and my answers were, human focused rather than maybe the physical world, which is a part of science.
I love that answer because it highlights something that I've more later come to discover. Everything has a story.
Yep.
High Street has a story. The Green Bay Packers have a story. And that's a great way to have gotten hooked on history.
Yep. And if you can tell a good story, I think that's a lot of, you've given many talks in your life, and I talk in front of students, and the difference between, I think, a boring teacher and an engaging history teacher is how you tell that story. You're giving them the same information. It's, are you making it narrative and relevant? And that's something that as a teacher, I don't always do, but I strive to.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's one last area that I want to go to. We've covered lots of connections you have to the Margaret Chase Smith Library. And I'm going to talk about one more as we transition into the final part of our discussion. And that is, you not only have a connection to the library, you have a connection to the family. You have a connection to Margaret Chase Smith, which we will get onto. But I'm going to go to share screen first. And let's see here. You saw the picture of you and your students.
Yep.
And this is you attending one of our events, I think one of our Leek Shaw lectures with John Taylor, who's on our staff and has come up, the director, state director of the History Day program. And so then there is this family connection, which goes to your wife.
Yeah.
And that is the young lady standing right next to Margaret Chase Smith, who's seated with the blue dress on. So why don't you tell folks about your wife, Sarah, and what her connection to Margaret Chase Smith is?
So I met my wife, Sarah, when I was an undergraduate at the University of Maine, Farmington. And Sarah is the great niece. I think it's 2 grades, but it might be 3.
Well, the way we phrase it, and I can actually do it here. This is, hopefully people see the arrow. This is Margaret Chase Smith's niece right here, Mary Goodridge.
Yep.
And this is Mary's daughter, Carol Bigelow.
Yep.
So that would be the great niece.
Yep.
And then this is Carol's daughter, Sarah, who, the way I would phrase it, is the great grandniece.
Great grandniece.
Great grandniece of Margaret Chase Smith.
Yeah. And so this is actually at Sarah's childhood home. And I believe Margaret was there maybe for this looks like a birthday or Christmas.
Yeah, I see a balloon right here. I think it's a birthday party.
I think so too.
Party. Yeah.
Birthday party, Sarah Bigelow. Perfect. Yeah, nice. So this is my wife's 6th birthday, it looks like. And I know that Margaret played a very influential role in her life. Margaret was very involved with her family. She didn't have kids of her own. And I know that for Sarah, she thought very highly of her, and her parents always instilled in her that, Margaret on her own had achieved a lot as a woman in a time period where women, I guess, were very restricted in what they could do.
So a perfect example of that is when Margaret's growing up, women still don't have the right to vote.
Exactly. And I always think of at the museum when you bring up the fact that when she became a senator, I think it still had the pronoun his on it.
Right. The plaque she was given is who being duly elected by the people of his state.
Yeah.
The point being, they weren't expecting there to be any women in the United States Senate in 1948, and they didn't have any plaques made up for women.
Yeah. So for her, it was very empowering to have this woman as a part of her life. And she remembers her as being very kind, very fun to be around, and very, very influential in her educational and life experience. So yeah, it was just a great role model for her. And I found out a couple years into dating that she was related to Margaret Chase Smith, which I just thought was great. She didn't even, I think she brought it up maybe almost 2 years into our relationship.
Oh, wow.
Graduate. It's like, oh yeah, by the way, I'm related to Margaret Chase Smith.
Interesting. And Margaret loved children. She didn't have any children of her own, so she did become close to the young people in her family. And one of the ways that that's demonstrated is when you go through her house, there's a picture of Sarah in Margaret Chase Smith's bedroom. And I believe Sarah's with her dog. I think it was a golden retriever.
Yeah. Sugar babe.
Okay. And then there's another room on the sort of the guest side of the house. A couple of pictures of her over there with her brother, Matt.
Yep.
Yeah. So that then leads us on down the road. You meet Sarah in college and you start dating, and eventually you decide to get married. So can you tell people what this location is?
Yeah, so this is inside the Margaret Chase Smith Library Museum. This is the house portion of the museum. And this is Sarah getting dressed for our wedding day. Our wedding was on the museum grounds. And Sarah, I believe this is in the Eisenhower room.
It is.
And
so named because President Eisenhower took a nap there when he came to visit Skowhegan back in 1955.
Yeah, and she used that, and we got some pictures of her with Margaret's hairbrush. She didn't use the hairbrush, but we took a picture of her with the hairbrush and the mirror that I believe Clyde had given her as a wedding.
Husband Clyde, yeah.
Yep. And we got married right outside the grounds, got ready in separate rooms within the library itself. And it was a wonderful day and very, very important for Sarah as well. A great venue, and very thankful that you folks allowed us to do that. And really my grandmother was kind of behind it. We were thinking about where we should have our wedding. And my grandmother knew that Sarah was related to Margaret, and she said, hey, isn't there a museum? Wouldn't that be a great place to get married? So my grandmother was a couple months away from passing away at that point, and we actually decided to take her up to the library. Mm-hmm. And Lynn King, who used to work at the library, met us there and took us on a tour. And Sarah was showing her all the different things. And my grandmother absolutely loved the museum. And at the end, she just looks at Sarah and she goes, Sarah, isn't there something you want to ask Mrs. King? And Sarah goes, yeah, do you think we could have our wedding here? We just got engaged. And Lynn said she would ask you, and you said yes. And it was very, very meaningful. And we're very, very grateful that we were able to have that experience at a place that growing up had meant so much to her and her family.
Well, I actually can't take credit for it because I think I was only assistant director at the time. I didn't become director until 2012.
Okay, so that was a year later.
A year later. So Greg Gallant would have given the okay for it. But I'm also noticing here that you have a 10th wedding anniversary coming up.
We do, August 13th of this year.
Okay, very good. Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you very much for taking the time to share with us what it's been like to teach over the past year and all the great things you are doing to get young people interested in history. Keep up the good work. Okay. And thank you for sharing your connections to Margaret Chase Smith through your wife, Sarah. And
thank you for having me on. And I know that I personally, but the students as well, are looking forward to the day that we can come back and visit the museum again. And it might not be this year, but whenever you open the doors again, we'll certainly be there as a school group.
We are definitely looking forward to when we can have students return. So we will look forward to hosting you once again at some point. Good luck with the remainder of the school year.
Excellent. Thank you, David.
Bye-bye.